everyone, and welcome once again to the Comic Vault. It's time for new acquisitions. I'm Captain Logan.
And I'm Dan.
Dan, we've got tons of cool stuff to talk about this week. And as always, I want to say thanks very much to Elite Comics out here in Overland Park, Kansas, for all their support. Dan, we've got a bunch of Marvel, and everything you and I both have to talk about this week is Marvel, bookended with Daredevil. So let's start straight away, shall we, with the new ongoing Daredevil book, Daredevil Dark Nights, #1.
This is a mini-series, actually.
Is it a mini-series? I was going to ask you about it. Here's what I thought was weird about it, too. I said ongoing because I wasn't sure. The reason I was confused about it was because it's called Dark Nights. You open it up, and it's got its own, story name at the front. It's called Angels Unaware, and then part 1 is Whiteout, and I wondered about that.
In the back, there's a letter that sort of explains everything that's going on in the book. It's an 8-issue mini, and they're doing multiple stories in it. So this isn't an 8-issue story. This is going till issue 4. So This is a 3-issue story, and then other creators are going to come in and do other stuff. Like Jimmy Palmiotti's doing an arc. I think he's rounding out the series, so that should be pretty cool.
I should have read that letter. I didn't notice that. I'm sorry. Anyway, thanks for that.
No.
Dan, start us out. What did you think of this first issue?
I think this is definitely a product of Marvel trying to make Daredevil an A-list character, because despite all the things they tried to do with him, putting him in events and putting the best creative teams possible on the book, he's never really been able to permeate the top tier of Marvel characters, and I felt like this was not for me in that it's a really accessible introduction to Daredevil's character. We don't have a ton of continuity-heavy stuff. We don't have really any of the supporting cast here, so you don't have to worry about knowing about previous relationships with people. It's just kind of a nice introduction to the world Matt Murdock lives in and him as a person. And I like that about it quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is a good introduction to Daredevil, and that's nice with it being a #1. There might be some folks that try Daredevil for the first time with this, and honestly, I kind of wish this was a monthly. Don't mean to harp on that too much, but it seems like as a premise, it might be cool to have a second running Daredevil book that's a little bit more of the kind of grittier, heavier Daredevil stuff. That's a little bit closer to what we were doing, pre-Shadowland, up through Shadowland. I kind of got that vibe from it again, except it was a little bit better than where that stuff ended off, I thought. This is, I used the word heavy. This is pretty heavy. I think it's a little bit overwritten, honestly. That was my one big complaint with it, is I thought it was a little wordier than it needed to be. And even for an introduction to Daredevil, I didn't think it needed to be quite as wordy as it was. Having said that, I think that... what is this, Weeks?
Yes.
Yeah, Lee Weeks.
He's an artist who worked on Daredevil in the 90s, and I'm not sure if he's written anything before.
I don't know. His writing's decent. Like I said, it's a little overwritten. It did feel like a little novice.
I agree with you on that.
A little novice in that he's got his artwork is quite good and competent, and I can tell what's going on. Not that he's explaining what's going on, but there's just a lot of internal monologue that doesn't necessarily need to be there, I felt like.
Right. I think the important thing that I really got out of his writing, though, is that he really does get the character in the world that he's inhabiting. There was a line, because I was rereading some Miller Daredevil after this, where he's talking about the city and the nature of it, and you have to take the good with the bad and sort of figure out what the city is for yourself and define your place within that. And Matt Murdock is, sort of defined by his city, and he has the inner demons, all that sort of thing. And there's stuff in here where you see people being real scumbags in the city, and then you have the people in the helicopter trying to, go through a snowstorm to save that little girl's life. So I really liked that he gets that duality with the character and the world that he lives in, and it's very reflective of the Miller stuff, I thought, what you had mentioned.
I agree with you, and I also felt that with all the Catholic stuff. I liked that came back in a big way here, and that he was very specifically giving you important bits of Matt Murdock's personal philosophy with Bible verses that permeate throughout, and I thought that helps give you a good sense of the character. Not just that he's religious, but that some of the ideals that he believes in that are biblical ideals have a great deal to do with why he's a costume vigilante, and then that's mixed in with the background with his father and how he promised his father he'd never be a fighter, but then he felt like ultimately because of the powers he ends up getting and the responsibility he has to use those powers, the only way he can honor his father is by breaking that, and honor thy father. That's part of his biblical philosophy. So I thought that, like you said, Weeks has a really good sense of who this guy is.
Exactly, and isn't it interesting that this is a story that seems to be the permeating theme is promises that need to be broken, and we saw that premise done in the Amazing Spider-Man movie, and it didn't really work at all, and Weeks is making a case for it here, and it works really well.
That's an excellent point.
I just thought that was something very interesting. I was sort of thinking about the breaking the promise thing, and I was like, if they had handled the Captain Stacy thing a little bit more like this in the movie, I would have bought it 100%.
Dan, let's go ahead and move on to Thanos Rising, number 3. Of course, Jason Aaron. And, Dan, this continues to be just a mortifying tale about a guy that I am both fascinated by and also find completely morally despicable because I'm supposed to. What'd you think, Dan?
I think the direction that Aaron is taking this character is really interesting because he's really playing him up to be sort of this, like, really timid, socially awkward person, that social outcast kind of guy that doesn't really have a place anywhere. And a lot of people I've heard sort of criticize this because they're like, oh, I don't want Thanos to be a nerdy guy before he's this big evil villain. That just doesn't really seem to suit his character. But I think his relationship with death makes so much more sense because if you think about someone that's never been able to love any other woman before, intimately, you know what I mean? Like, you would have an obsession with that person, and I feel like him being a timid person that was picked on and didn't really know how to relate to him when he was younger, that sort of is embodied in the relationship he has with her and why he's so obsessed with her to a degree. The psychology of it all is very interesting.
Yeah, what we've got here is the coming-of-age story turned on its head. We've got a guy that doesn't want to be a killer who decides that the only way he can find himself is to kill. And what I really like is that even after he's done the horrible, horrible thing he did that made me react in a physical way at the end of the second issue, he still is trying not to kill, and is with these here he's with some pirates, and he's continuing still even after that to try not to kill. And I think that's I think it's really interesting that we've got a guy who is pure evil at the core, and yet is trying to go against that. And it's your still, even after the evil he's committed. And so you got your classic nature versus nurture thing. Was he really pure evil the way his mother thought he was when he was born, and then he proves it to her by murdering her in the most disgusting way possible? Is it nature or nurture? I don't know.
Yeah,
I can't tell you.
It goes back to the thing you were saying about turning things on their head and in the typical way that the story would be told. Like, most of the stories of its nature are about someone having an inner demon and struggling against the evil within and conquering it and being a good person. This is him struggling against the good in him, really, and embracing the evil side, which is an interesting way. I've never really seen that done before.
Yeah, it's fresh to me, too, and I think that the story is leaning on the side of Thanos does have a choice and he's making the wrong one. I think it's leaning there.
Yeah.
And I think that Death is pushing him in that direction, or this girl that seems like she's going to become Death.
I think there's no way around her not being Death at this point, I would say.
The sense I always got reading Infinity Gauntlet and other things with Thanos and Death was that she was always ignoring him, that maybe she's never said 2 words to him ever, and that he's just obsessed with her and you never entirely know why. Here, she's playing playing with them like a mouse. You know, she's you get toward the end of this, and she, not to give too much away, but she's stringing him along, giving him the sense that he might be able to be with her, and you know in the back of your mind that she's never going to allow that to happen, and that she's just using him. And if she wasn't there, I don't think he'd become what he's becoming.
It's almost like he's hanging on to that last piece of goodness in trying to like her, because the last time he was able to feel at home and not kill people was when he was talking to her. He's struggling to be a good person in that way. Like, he's trying to chase that, and he's never able to attain it, which is the tragic thing about him.
And it's also your classic story of he's a little older than a teenager now, but still kind of that teenage identity thing. He's trying to find himself. He doesn't know who he is, and he's got that thing that you hear a lot of teenagers say when they're struggling to decide who they want to be and what they want to do with their lives. I don't know how to feel anything. He's dispassionate, and his lack of passion is dangerous. And is there some kind of social commentary there, accidental or otherwise? I don't know, but I think it's worth exploring.
I think it's fascinating. And did you notice that they mentioned Galactus in here, and they're even seeding the Thanos Galactus thing in this book too?
They're even seeding the Cosmic Cube.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure if they're seeding the Galactus thing with Thanos so much as just bringing up... They're kind of helping us know what period this takes place in. Not everybody knows what Galactus is yet. Thanos hasn't heard about the Cosmic Cube yet.
The only reason I bring that up is because I had read an interview with Axel Alonso where he had said that this is going to be setting up Infinity to a degree towards the end.
There you go, then. I didn't realize that.
I don't know. I just saw that little line of dialogue and it sort of made me think of that. You know what I mean? Which would be cool, I suppose. I don't know how much I'm looking forward to that event now, because I'm just not reading the main Hickman Avengers book, and I feel like I'm going to be lost. But we'll see.
Let's go ahead and move on, shall we?
Sure.
Big recommendation from me there.
Oh yeah.
Fantastic. And chilling to the bone. Let's move on now to Age of Ultron, Book 9, which I have to say, Dan, is my favorite issue of this so far. And we're all honestly almost finished with it. We're going on to Book 10 here. And when I say this is my favorite issue, I guess I'm saying that mostly because now I got a better sense of why the heck we're doing this in the first place, and you know, where it's all been headed. I complained a little bit that this was a little slow to get going, and now I feel like it's moved at a pretty cool pace. And I guess I just sort of enjoyed the novelty of two Wolverines and having one Wolverine that was in the original Wolverine costume, and I think the biggest thing I appreciated was that it didn't go where I thought it would, especially with the cover, where I thought that as soon as one Wolverine met the other in deciding we've got to stop ourselves, or myself, from killing, it gets confusing, from killing Hank Pym when I did that a couple issues ago, he was just going to come right in and start, you know, beating the crap out of himself. That's not how it goes, and that surprised me a little bit. What did you think, Dan?
I thought it was interesting that I sort of understand, like you, a little bit better with this issue, what Bendis' sort of plan for this was, and I feel like this is similar to End of Days, where this seems like it's just going to be an examination of the legacy and the effect Hank Pym has on the Marvel Universe and where that eventually goes, which was not what I expected at all, because, you know, who would have thought that we'd have an event focused on Hank Pym?
He's not even in the first three issues. Yeah.
He's not in it all that much at all, and interestingly enough, when you think about it, Ultron's not even in this book very much at all. We see like drones of Ultron early on and how he's manipulating the Vision, but he's playing the same sort of role that Hank Pym is playing, where like Hank Pym's the protagonist of the story, but he's not really in it that much. The same thing with Ultron as the villain, and it's interesting that that Bendis has been able to make all these changes to continuity and still sort of have it string together and make sense to a degree.
What I like is that he examines how complicated the butterfly effect would really be. That it's not just that if you go back and change one thing, everything changes. He's actually discussing in more of a human way why exactly that is. That sometimes really things that become really terrible things are also, at least at some point during their existence, good things. That things are very large things that get made are just more complicated than this when we're talking about technology. So the idea is, if Ultron hadn't been made, then magic would have taken over before technology, and then you have a whole different set of problems than you do. So it isn't killing Hank Pym that causes this other bizarre present day. It's the destruction of it's Ultron never existing, and that's actually necessary. I thought that was a good place to go with it.
It's a good theme with Ultron too, because Ultron has always been one of those villains where he despises humanity, he wants to kill them, but he hates them for reasons that you can see reflected in the machine, but it doesn't want to admit it because it doesn't want to say that it's human. It's sort of like the Vulcan thing where they just don't want to be associated with humans at all because they find them to be inferior to them, but he, is homicidal about it. So I think it's interesting that they're doing that sort of thing with him in this sort of story. They're playing on that theme in a grandiose scale sort of way, and I like that about it, where humans are always going to have those demons inside them, even if you destroy one of the evil faces that's challenging them. And humans are always going to have to learn to overcome their problems. There's not a simple way to solve them. That's how humans learn and evolve, is through facing the problems we have and that sort of thing, not running away from them.
Yeah, and so that's reflected in Wolverine's character arc.
Exactly, yes. And I thought it was a good decision to put Wolverine in a different costume when he's talking to himself in here,
just so we can tell who's who.
Yeah, I was worried on the cover here where we have, Wolverine stabbing himself in the same costume, that I'd be enduring an issue of two talking head Wolverines that look exactly the same, and I couldn't tell who was who.
Especially because on the cover, they're wearing the same costume.
Yeah, that's what I said. But I like to see the first appearance Wolverine costume again. That was cool. And Invisible Woman is taking the same moral stance that she apparently has had, and that Wolverine the X-Men AU issue seems even more superfluous than it did before.
Yeah. Well, at least they haven't all been that way.
Yeah. True.
Well, let's move on, shall we? All New X-Men, number 12. So the cover makes a big deal out of what this issue mostly is, which is the All New X-Men meeting the Uncanny Avengers. The most fascinating thing about this to me was seeing young Scott meet his brother, and how his brother doesn't react the way I thought he might, given that the two Cyclopses haven't been getting along at all. And you've got people reacting really negatively to young Cyclops because of what he'll turn into. Havoc doesn't do that at all. Havoc treats him like he would have treated him had he never killed Xavier.
Right. And it's interesting that the cover is the complete opposite depiction.
Oh, yeah, that's a good... What's that about?
I loved everything they did with Cyclops' character in this book. I'm with you. That interaction was fascinating, especially when you have the whole thing, the Dark Path thing with Cyclops foreshadowed in his character, and the moral ambiguity of the two sides that are in conflict here. Like, Wolverine's talking about how Cyclops needs to do all these things and how he's young and naive, and Cyclops is well, you're a murderer and you're not getting anything done. Mystique is a murderer, and she's getting things done. What's wrong with that? It's such a gray area, and that's what old Cyclops' point is. He's saying, we've all done bad things that we need to live up to. Why not move on and try to get something done than try to, fight internally about who did what? We all have, red ledgers, blood on our hands. Wolverine especially. So I thought that was a fascinating thing to do with his character in here.
I also like that the Mystique plot is being forwarded a little more than it had been, and that you're finally getting a sense of maybe a little bit more of why she's doing what she's doing. And I like that her cohorts are kind of calling her on. Well, you seem to be very fixated on the X-Men, even though you're pretending like you don't care about mutants anymore. So we're getting a little bit more of a sense of what she's doing, although it's still somewhat mysterious.
Yeah, agreed. And, man, Jean Grey just gets scarier and scarier with every issue, huh?
Yeah.
I really like that Bendis is sort of addressing what he himself did to the mutant race through Jean Grey, which was always a sort of interesting phenomenon to me. Bendis was a guy that had never written the main X-Men books before, but he did House of M, and it like changed the status quo of the X-Men for like until now.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about it like that.
Sort of dealing with his own story threads there. It's nice. I just saw that was always interesting that he made such a big, plot thread of the X-Men universe, and he wasn't the guy to deal with it. So it's nice to see that play out here.
I also like the kind of intentional irony of Jean Grey not fully comprehending what happens when she gets older and she gets the Phoenix Force and all the terrible problems that happen due to her being Dark Phoenix, while she's making this huge deal about Scarlet Witch. And those two have a lot of things in common, except that Jean Grey hasn't experienced any of them yet. So she does. So they don't have it in common yet, but they're actually very close once both of them become fully fledged adults, and after before her death. Yeah.
That's very true, because older Jean Grey has the same sort of thing going on. No one's sure if they can ever trust her because she's got that Phoenix thing going on. She could flip out and kill all the X-Men at any time.
Yeah, and then we just had Scott, who was the Dark Phoenix and did exactly that. And actually went farther than she did and actually killed somebody people care about, yeah.
Yeah, you're right. That's a very interesting parallel. I see people that are critics of this book say that it's too much of people just sitting around talking. And they're right. That's all it is, pretty much. But I eat it up with a spoon.
Yeah,
Dennis's dialogue is so good in this X-Men stuff.
He just keeps giving me a lot to think about. And the art is nothing to sneeze at.
Imminent is fantastic.
If we have to look at a bunch of people sitting around talking, I'd rather it be somebody like Amonin, because it's so. It's really, really dramatic. It looks, I say this constantly, but it looks like storyboarded dialogue.
Right.
So it's still interesting to look at. It's not, and even more so than I thought the art was when it was all just people standing around talking back in Bendis' Avengers. This is kind of nicer to look at, I think.
I agree.
Nothing against Romita, I just didn't think that Romita was as good at that as maybe Amonin is here.
No, I agree. Romita's good for big Kirby-esque action stuff, in my opinion, especially when he's doing team stuff. I love that there's another parallel I was just remembered when I flipped through here with Thor and Havoc and Cyclops' relationship, where he sees the two brothers come together and Cap doesn't really understand, and Thor's like, I have trouble with my brother too, and he back as a kid and he's all cool and not evil yet. Yeah, I understand. Let them go do their thing.
Good point.
I liked that Thor had things to say about the X-Men. Interestingly enough, the person who had the least things to say about the X-Men was Rogue, which I thought was sort of weird.
She was barely here, yeah.
Yeah, she makes the point of there's no mutant and human problems anymore. There's just problems, but
right.
She was a little bit more radical in her interpretation of Scarlet Witch and that whole situation in Remender's book. I feel like she might have come down on Jean Grey's side a little bit, but she didn't really do any of that. I was sort of surprised, but...
Dan, finally, for our stuff together, let's go ahead and move on to Daredevil End of Days number 8. Guess what, Dan? We finally know what the heck Maypone is!
Yes.
I'm not going to tell you what it is, but...
Boy, was this one of the most riveting single-issue comic books I've ever read.
Oh, you think? All right.
I don't know, like, when I was reading this, I had the experience of, the cliffhanger that Bendis had at the end of every issue where you didn't know what was going to happen when you flipped open the next one. I had that every page here. As soon as Matt Murdock, I think it's at the beginning of the book where he's talking about the mentor for the new Daredevil here, you don't know who it is. You think, oh, at first maybe it's the Punisher. Then you think, oh, maybe it's... who did they have after that? There was a few, maybe Nick Fury, too. Maybe Peter Parker was the guy that was going to mentor him. You're not really sure who's the person that's going to come in and change his life for the better. And then it ends on such an optimistic note, and Bendis didn't forget to build Matt Murdock up after he destroyed him, which is something that people have forgotten to do, and that's something Bendis honestly forgot to do at the end of his run. And I like that he's sort of finishing it off here, where like this is all about the preservation of the legacy of Matt Murdock, and he succeeded in the end.
Yeah, he does it in death, which is cool. I like that there wasn't any kind of a cheat. I don't mind giving this away. I like that it doesn't turn out that Matt Murdock was alive the whole time. I wondered about that in places in this book. Bendis is a master of misdirection. I've said this before. I think that he is rivaling Mark Waid here in that. There were a lot of points in this where I kept thinking, oh man, they're not going to tell us what Maypone is, and I kept worrying about it. I was afraid he was going to cop out.
That was another thing that I was going to mention. Where I was like
terrified he was going to cop out on us. Where he was, there were a couple of places, especially visually, where I don't want to say exactly what it is, but there's a thing and it gets destroyed, and you're like, oh no, we're never going to find out what it means, and then we finally do get to know, and clearly it's not an afterthought. It's something that he was building to the whole time. And I feel like this has got to read, obviously it's an 8-issue miniseries, it probably is supposed to be read like a graphic novel. This thing, read all together instead of month to month, is probably quite the read, in a way, in an even better way than it was month to month.
Yeah, I'd be really interested if you'd be at some point in rereading this whole thing and doing a vault on this, because I think when we sit down and reread this is going to go down as one of the best Daredevil stories ever told.
I really think so too, and I want to read it all before I say that.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to read it all together before I say that.
But based on my experience reading it, I am just fully riveted by this story, and this new Daredevil guy here I really like, and I wouldn't mind if Bendis did a story, a Daredevil, series in the future with this guy in the costume.
I wouldn't either. I was surprised by that. Who the mentor turns out to be is a huge thing. You'd never call it. And it turns out to be what the whole story's been building to. I have just been completely riveted by every issue of this, and thought that it was built up to a point where it was probably going to disappoint me at the end. I worried about that. And all the way through this last issue, I worried about that. And Bendis was playing with my expectations all the way through. This is definitely, admittingly, I've not read every Daredevil thing there is. There's a lot of stuff I've missed. This is easily one of the best Daredevil stories I've ever read, even just reading it month to month.
Yeah, and if you're someone that has read Brian Michael Bendis' run on Daredevil, this is the end of it. At the end of Bendis' run, he leaves Daredevil in a place where he's in a jail cell and his life is completely in the gutter, and Brubaker kind of has a pick up from that. It's left in a really pessimistic way, and for me, Daredevil should be an optimistic thing. Even Frank Miller's stuff, there was always like, even though Matt Murdock's in this really bad place right now, he's the kind of guy that's going to pick himself up and learn from that mistake, because that's the kind of guy that he is. He's that strong. And that happens here in its own unique, really interesting way. So I would highly recommend this for people that, have read Bendis' stuff, and even if you don't like endings, I think it might surprise you. It's really great.
I think it's cool that you said that this is the end of his run, because it's like, if I like this idea, if I were allowed to actually kill off my character, what would it be? Or if I were allowed to actually let a major character like this end after I was the one that did a lot of writing on it, how would I end it? I think if anybody, if it's fair for anybody to do that, I think with this character, I think Bendis is the guy.
Either him or Miller, definitely. And I loved that there was a panel ripped straight from the first story arc of his run on Daredevil, because this kid was in a story as a little boy in Bendis' run previously, and then he gets adopted by Ben Urich in that story, and then we fast forward here, and he's the guy in the costume, which is very cool.
This
so it's a completion of all of that sort of stuff, wrapping up a lot of the long-term plans Bendis had for this.
All the way through, this was a Ben Urich story, and when it ends, it's a Matt Murdock story. And I don't feel like it's jarring. I don't feel like it's like, oh, who's our protagonist? I don't know where we are. I think that there is actually a paralleled story being told about who Ben Urich is versus who Daredevil is. I think when the story is over, Ben Urich is a hero as much as Daredevil is. And I think that's really interesting because you've got this guy who is who's investigating things. He's trying to figure out who Daredevil's killer was and all of that. He's a detective in kind of a way Matt Murdock is a detective, but the difference between them is one puts on a costume and one doesn't, and so he's like an unsung hero. He's not a vigilante. He doesn't have to worry about should I kill a person or not. I don't think he ever really has to wrestle with that the way Matt Murdock does. And then this story by the end is really thematically dealing with that idea of when should heroes kill and when should they not, which is something that we deal with all the time, sometimes ad nauseum in superhero stories. What I like here is that the question isn't as much should superheroes never kill. Is it like Ben Urich says this in his newspaper article? It's more that sometimes superheroes have to kill, and they only do it when they have to, and that's a more sobering, realistic way to look at it. Maybe a little bit pessimistic, but this idea that sometimes that has to happen, and so it kind of makes Matt Murdock look more heroic. And I like that the word superhero vigilante is that those two words are sandwiched together.
And it's such a classic Daredevil thing to have that moral ambiguity, because that's so Frank Miller. To have a world where you're not sure where that line is and who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, it's so classic Daredevil stuff. And I love that he basically sets up all of the relationships that Matt Murdock had with like the Punisher and Spider-Man and all these previous guys with the new one. Like, you notice he has a Spider-Man t-shirt on when he's talking to Peter Parker in the bar.
Right.
So he's obviously, he has a good relationship with Spider-Man, even though he doesn't know Peter Parker and him are the same person at that point. And he's got that sort of sort of understood but antagonistic relationship with the Punisher, where he doesn't agree with him, but he's like, okay, I guess I'm kind of glad you're around sometimes, but I don't like you, and I'll stop you if you get in my way or if you're doing things that I find to be morally against what I'm doing. I liked that a lot. I don't know. I can find something to love in every panel of this book, to be honest with you. I mean, the only thing really would be that Spider-Man suit that Peter Parker's wearing in the future. It looks like it's got more legs than a spider. So. Yeah. No, octopuses and spiders have the same amount of legs. They're both 8, so that doesn't make any sense. Never mind. But I was like, oh, maybe that's Spider Rock. That's depressing. But anyway.
Well, I said that I think I contradicted myself a little bit earlier. I said I didn't know if I wanted to call this one of my favorite Daredevil stories, and then I said I think this is one of my favorite Daredevil stories already. Anyway, highly recommended. If you weren't reading this at all, obviously get it in trade. I'm sure they'll put that out quick. So.
Oh, yeah.
I was in love with it.
It's unfortunate they already collected Bendis' stuff in omnibuses, and I have those. I would love to have an omnibus with all of this stuff in it, because this is just as essential to his stuff as everything else. So.
Let's go ahead and move on to our solo stuff, and I'm going to briefly talk about Action Comics number 21, which is an issue that I don't have a great deal to say about. I'm still a little bit curious to see where this was going to go with Tony Daniel trying to write from Andy Diggle's notes. Andy Diggle, of course, left DC, and or at least left this book. He left DC, and so Daniel's doing his best. Daniel is an artist well before he's a writer. I don't think he does anything in this that's just really strange, putting words in people's mouths that they wouldn't say. I think he did actually a lot better on this than even the previous issue. And this is mostly just Superman fighting Lex Luthor. I mean, that's pretty much the issue.
That's always cool.
Lex shows up and he doesn't know it's Lex for a while. I do. You know why? Because he's got a big L on his belt. But he's got a helmet and he's like, oh, well, it's green. He's got an L on his belt. I think it's Lex Luthor. This is basically trotted out as being in 52, kind of the first time Superman and Lex in a big robot suit have fought each other. I don't know if that's happened yet before in 52. I kind of thought maybe it had, but they really act like it's sort of the first time. So I'm not sure. I'm a little lost there. Whatever.
What a seminal moment, I guess.
I certainly haven't read everything Superman 52. Tony Daniel is an artist I've always loved. I think he's a little better with Batman than he is Superman, but boy, there's some great panels. I mean, it's
beautiful.
If nothing else, is a pretty book to look at. Mostly what I gathered from this is that the idea is Lex has made a giant mistake in going up against Superman personally because nobody knows that he's a big evil supervillain and that he does, illegal things, and nobody's able to quite prove that this happens because the only person that was there that could take footage of it on her phone was Lois, and she dropped her phone and cracked it. But then at the end, you get the sense that maybe the phone's okay. So maybe they'll, somebody will be able to show everybody that there's, some really terrible maniacal things Lex is doing. I also appreciate that there is the sense here that Lex has a little bit of, I don't want to say a sense of altruism, but he's at least saying to Superman, you're this alien nobody can trust, and I've got to stop you, because even when you're attempting to do the right thing, bad things happen. And I kind of like that that's there. A lot of the time with Lex, it's this more broad, one-dimensional idea of, well, I want to be on top, and you're on top right now, and I'm going to say that it's because you're an evil alien, but I don't really think that. Here, he seems to have a little bit of that, where he actually thinks, Superman, you're too big for your britches, and nobody can trust you even when you're trying to do the right thing. I've got to take you down. So I sort of liked that about it. I'm a little mixed on... I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that makes it makes a lot of sense for him to have that attitude towards Superman now, especially since we got more of the, Crusader for the People 30 Superman earlier with Morrison.
Yes, exactly. And keep in mind, of course, this is still in the Action books, so that's the place to put it.
Yeah.
I'm a little mixed on this one. All the stuff going on at the beginning with this whole hybrid thing, I didn't really care about. It was more, illusions to make Superman think that he's fighting people he's not fighting. But then when the Lex stuff happened, I got a little bit more into it. So, I don't know, overall... I was impressed with Tony Daniel for making this work the way he did, given that he wasn't supposed to write this.
That's cool.
Go ahead.
The only solo book I have this week is from Vertigo, which is, I think, the first Vertigo comic book I've ever bought before. And this is Astro City #1 by Kurt Busiek, Alex Ross on covers, because Alex Ross designs all of the characters for this and does all the covers. I think he did interiors on it before, and I can't recall who the artist is off the top of my head. But anyway, this is Kurt Busiek's independently owned book. This is ran for 60 issues before this, but Kurt Busiek got deathly ill. He almost passed away a couple times, and it really hindered his ability to put the book out, obviously, and the quality of the book I had heard. So I had heard a lot of good things from people like Duke, highly recommending this stuff, saying it's one of their favorite comic book ever done. I fanboy raves about this stuff, so I was like, now they're doing a new #1, I'll check it out, see how it is, because I love Kurt Busiek's run on Untold Tales of Spider-Man, which is basically like Legends of the Dark Knight for Spider-Man, going back to the early Stan Lee and Steve Ditko stuff and filling in gaps, which was awesome. So this takes place in a universe of superheroes where they're all established, and there's not really a main protagonist in this book. It's sort of looking at the world and the city as a character and the effect that superheroes and their various ideologies have on the city and how it affects the development of people. Like, we have the Samaritan in here who's basically the Superman analogy, and he's really positive and upbeat, and sort of wants to preserve the old way of life that people would have lived in, like, the 40s, where he's, obviously trying to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. He's curious, he wants to explore, and that's sort of reflected in the people that look up to him, and then there's people that are a little bit more pessimistic. It's really interesting looking at the inspirational aspect of superheroes and, like, the psychological impact they would have on people if they really existed. I think that's really interesting. There's this interesting sort of framing device with this character that knows he's in a comic book, and then there's a weird reveal at the end that sort of makes me think I'm not sure that anything in this book actually happened. So I'm not really sure where that's going. That's sort of interesting. So, I don't know, like, the book was interesting. There's some characters in here that I just feel like I was supposed to have... I would have known or appreciated a little bit more if I had read the previous stuff, but this was really interesting. I enjoyed it. It wasn't like, the best thing I ever read. I wasn't, like, over the moon about it, but I'm at least curious that maybe I'll check out the second issue if it comes out in a week where, I'm not overloaded with stuff. But, yeah, I'd recommend this if you're looking for something that's a superhero book that's not from the... I mean, I guess DC does Vertigo, but not of the two big, lines from the big two.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is pretty good.
I've got two more books I want to talk about real quick. Well, two books I got that I will talk about real quick. Here is Green Arrow number 21. Deadly Secrets is what it says on the cover. We don't have fold-outs anymore that we can make fun of, unfortunately, with DC books. But, yeah, I'm going to miss those, actually. I'm going to miss going Jimmy Olsen.
The next dumb DC promotion is coming up soon, though, and we'll be able to make fun of that.
That's true, where DC steals Marvel's Point One thing and goes weirdly full tilt with it. Yeah, stay tuned, folks, for that. So, Deadly Secrets, this says on the cover, and the Deadly Secrets that are being referred to are what the island was really about. Basically, in this continuity, which now I have to keep these two island things straight between this and Arrow. In this continuity, the idea is that it turns out Oliver Queen was actually sent to this island on purpose by his father, with only a bow and arrow, and the bow and arrow was given to him very, very specifically because there's this like whole. I think I mentioned this last time. We are a couple times ago talking about Green Arrow that we learned that there's this whole like Society of the Arrow. And that Oliver Queen was actually supposed to be in this thing, and that it wasn't his idea to become an archer. That it's kind of his destiny. We're kind of making this sort of Superman. I don't want to say Superman, but sort of like that. Sort of just this big, am I going to fulfill my destiny or not? Sort of thing. I don't know how I feel about it right away. It seems a little hokey on paper. In a way, it's not in the book. The book is taking me in. The book is making me say, no, this is really interesting. I kind of like this idea. Dan, like with Spider-Man with JMS stuff, we're back to totems. Although it's not animal totems, it's weapons. So you've got these 6 different totems, and they each have their own society involved with them. And if you get the special version of the totem, you become enlightened. Whatever that ultimately means, because Green Arrow, of course, hasn't gotten his yet.
Yeah.
So there's like, one is the hatchet, and then there's some other ones. Well, we actually get to meet the guy who is supposed to have the hatchet totem in this, and he's actually going to get together with Green Arrow and help him kind of fulfill his quest for the arrow version of the totem thing. And there's this great line where Oliver says, wait, you have the actual totem version of the hatchet, and he says, yeah, I'm all enlightened and stuff. That's his awesome. Verbatim, that's his line, and I was like, oh, that's fun. So Lemire is having a lot of fun with this. Part of what I like is that I can take it seriously, but he's a little tongue-in-cheek about it too. He realizes that the concept is kind of out there, so he's embracing that and the characters kind of get that this is weird, but there's also enough at stake, without going too much into detail, that I'm buying it in a way I don't feel like I ought to. I feel like I should hate this idea, but I'm not hating this idea yet,
Yeah.
and so...
It's interesting that seems to be working so well, especially since it started out from what a lot of people, I think, had said, where it was sort of a gritty street-level thing when we weren't on the island, right?
Yeah, it was, and it's still drawn that way, but now it's looking a little bit more mystical. Not that there's a lot of mysticism, but just, because of the things that we're dealing with. And so I think what's grounding it is this notion of Oliver now wanting to live up to his father's expectations when he never cared about that before. And we find out that his father's expectations are that he would become basically Green Arrow. So it's almost more of a mantle being passed down thing than it
Sounds
ever
very Star Warsy
than it ever was before. I don't know if big mainstream Green Arrow fans are going to care for this because it's so contrary to what it ever was previously.
Yeah.
However, it's not contrary to Oliver Queen's character. What we've kind of got going on is Oliver went to the island to learn something, and he didn't really learn it. I mean, he became Green Arrow, and so he learned how to become a superhero, but it was also kind of handed to him because he had all this money, and he was able to build trick arrows and stuff. Well, now he's lost his company, and he ends this issue, and that happened a few issues ago, and he ends this issue basically saying, maybe it's better to start from the bottom and work my way up. And interestingly, and so he's starting to build not just a sense of responsibility, but he's also understanding the simple value of hard work, in a way he never did before. And that's kind of something his father always wanted him to learn, but it's difficult when you're rich and you can pay for anything you want to pay for, right?
Yeah.
Connected to this is his current arch nemesis, which is Komodo, who is, I won't go too far into this, but basically we discover here Komodo actually killed his father, and Komodo also was kind of, in a way, raised by his father in a way that Oliver didn't allow himself to be, and so these two are almost brothers, even though they're not blood related. And Komodo did work his way up from nothing, and so Green Arrow is trying to become what Komodo is, except the good version. So I don't know. There's a lot going on here. And I've actually talked about it longer than I meant to. There's a lot going on here, and I'm surprised that I'm enjoying this premise as much as I am. I'm going to keep on this. We'll see where it goes.
It sounds like he's almost like the combination of the mysticism and the gritty street level stuff and the father themes. It almost sounds like DC's trying to position Green Arrow as like their sort of Daredevil character.
That's precisely what I thought reading this.
In a sense.
Okay, so anyway, last thing, Spawn number 232. Look, it's a cover that's not derivative of any other cover. As far as I know.
Oh, it's not?
I don't. Well, maybe it is. I don't think it is.
I don't recognize it. But
Yeah, I don't think it is.
It might be.
Well, you see, I said that, and then I'm like, no, I don't. I don't think it is. Let's see what happens in this. Oh, a lot of explaining of things, which is what this book has been for a long time. I love, by the way, at the top of this cover, it says 32 straight issues with the same art team. I mean, like McFarlane's really bragging about things lately at the top of this, where he'll be like last issue, it was like, or last year rather, it was like a certain number of issues in 2012. Look how amazing we are. I think that's
we know
very
how to publish
strange.
comics and keep creative teams on a book. I guess. I mean, they're doing better than DC. I guess.
Does that get anybody? Does that get anybody to buy the book? I mean, what's
not me?
Well, I can't help but think that he's just trying to impress the people that are already here. Because what's weird about that is 32 straight issues with the same art team. You know what that means? Not a good jumping on point. Just saying.
Yeah, and if you found the art not to your liking, or the book in general not to your liking for a while, then More of the same's a coming.
This is kind of more the same, although a little more interesting than the last few issues. We've got Clown going on and on and on, explaining to I won't go too far into this, but explaining to one of the characters exactly what's going on with this battle that is being waged internally with the Spawn costume and Jim Downing, because basically the big question is what exactly happens with the costume that we've known for a while now, definitely has its own ambitions, and is still, I mean, like now he's calling the costume Letha a lot more often, which is its name, and so like Letha is like a full-fledged character now, and Letha is very much still a patron of Hell, and cares a lot about Hell, and is doing Hell's bidding, so the big question is, if a Spawn costume entity thing takes over a real person instead of the like reanimated corpse kind of a dead person like has always been done every 400 years, what exactly happens, and what does that do to the costume? What does that do to the man? And that's the question that's brought up all the way through here. So I enjoy the ideas. I enjoy thinking about the ideas. It's still very, very, very plot heavy, very, very plot driven, and I'm not caring about Jim Downing the way I'd like to. 32 issues ago, I felt like I was in Jim Downing's head. I don't feel like I've been there for a long time now, and it still feels a lot like McFarlane trying to get out his ideas on paper, and it's like it still feels like I'm watching him explain to himself, trying to set everything straight for himself, how the mythology works, and it's just not good storytelling in that way. But the ideas are interesting, I'm enjoying thinking about them. But Clown does, and I got to be honest with you, I'm pretty sure it's Clown, and I know that sounds silly, but the thing is, the way that Kurdansky is drawing this, and I love Kurdansky, but he's being a little sketchier in this issue, and I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be Clown, but I can't really see who I'm looking at some of the time in this. But anyway, he says something that really annoyed me. He pretends to be somebody named, I think, Dr. Kerr, Kerr, and I thought, oh, that's a lot like the Joseph Kerr thing with Batman, where every now and again Joker would call himself Joseph Kerr, and then the joke is it's Joker and nobody ever catches on, right? Well, later on, he's not just calling himself Dr. Kerr, it's Joseph Kerr, and then he even makes the Joker joke, and I went, with Clown? Oh no, like that whole thing just blew my mind that he went there.
Yeah,
he just straight up ripped that off.
Between those two things is already sort of on the nose, you know.
And McFarlane is making a big deal out of how he doesn't want Spawn to be a superhero comic anymore. I wouldn't have gone there.
Why doesn't he want it to be a superhero comic?
Oh man, we can get into it later. Yeah, he does.
Okay,
I'll talk to you after the show about it. But yeah, I don't know. Basically, he's really into the whole more realistic mainstream horror thing now. It's got supernatural elements, but he doesn't want to do big monster fights anymore and things like that. He says after 20 years he's tired of superhero comics and there's nothing left to say with them. So now he's doing, you know, more of a gritty horror supernatural book, because of course there's so much more left to say there, more than there is superhero comics, because that's not also been done to death, right? Anyway, yeah, I'll tell you about some of that later on, but anyway, so yeah, better than it has been, but the Joseph Kerr thing really rubbed me the wrong way.
Sounds like he should tap Kurdansky's friend Hurwitz to write that book. I feel like if he wants a horror kind of superhero vibe, that would work really well, because you said he's doing that kind of stuff over in Dark Knight, and Kurdansky works with him really well. And
and I feel like he works with him better than he works with McFarlane, because as much as I love Kurdansky, I feel like his work's been falling off a little bit on Spawn lately. Especially this issue, I wasn't impressed, man. Like, I felt like he was phoning it in a little bit, and I wonder if he's just kind of tired of working on that book. Or he could be stretched too thin, because of the kind of drawing he does. It might be difficult to do, because I mean he's not doing photorealistic, but it looks complicated, it looks kind of painted, so I'm not sure exactly what his process is. I'm just saying that, like, it might be too much for him to do 2 monthly books, and right now he has been the last couple issues, so.
Isn't it interesting that two of the bigger Batman books over at DC both have Spawn artists on them right now.
I know, I've been thinking that too. That's kind of cool. I really hope Dark Knight keeps Krasinski for a long time. I really like him there. He's not everybody's cup of tea. I like him. I think he's cool. Anyway, let's go ahead and go to Book of the Week, Dan. My Book of the Week this week, I don't want to be predictable, but I'm going to be. I don't care. Because I think I did this last time, but I'm picking Thanos Rising.
Yeah.
This is just rubbing me the right way, and then also making me want to take a shower every time I read it.
Oh, I know. I'm with you on that. That was a close contender for me. All New X-Men was a close contender. I really enjoyed that one too. But I'm going to be wholesale predictable. Daredevil End of Days is my favorite thing this week. If you couldn't tell when we were talking about it, I really, really like this, and I wanted to sit down and reread the whole thing before the show, but I just didn't have time. I'm just so much looking forward to just reading this all as a whole now. It's so good.
Dan, I left it for you on purpose.
Thank you.
That was almost my pick too, and then I thought, Dan's gonna want that one. Well, everybody, thanks as always for watching New Acquisitions. Really hope you enjoyed it. We sure did. Dan, thanks as always for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And if you're ever in the Kansas City area, be sure to come out and check out Elite Comics in Overlook Park, Kansas. That is the store that I shop at and where I get my books every week, and they're absolutely fantastic. Anyway, check that out, and we'll see you again next week with lots more comic reviews. Dan, we've got 0 Year starting next week.
Yes.
Scott Snyder, which I know you've just been head over heels.
I'm
Can't
over
wait.
the moon about seeing 11 issues of Batman's origin. To say the least.
I hope that it rocks your socks off. That's what I hope.
You know what? I hope it does too. But the first issue, I'm gonna be kicking and screaming, man.
Well, we'll drag you through the trenches next week. Thanks again, everybody. Sure appreciate you watching. I'm Captain Logan.
I'm Dan.
And happy reading.